Welcome to the panel discussion on the subject of cities and regions as launchpads for digital transformation. My name is Niall Dowling. I'm a member of the advisory board here at Asia Matters and chair of this session, which will run until 3:20 today. I wanted to start, first of all, by thanking Alice for a really fascinating global perspective on what's happening in our cities right now. To me personally, what really stood out is this sense of opportunity that exists among all the negativity and among all the bad news. As Alice said, cities are rethinking themselves and using smart technology and digital technology as the enabler for that. So, you know, the idea that a smart city can help combat social isolation, the idea that it can facilitate protest or social inclusion, the idea that it can help us to have a green recovery. These are really optimistic themes, and I'm really looking forward to discussing them with our panel. So I'm delighted to be joined by a really expert group today. We have Robert Schulhammer, who's the Chief Representative for Europe at the Asian Development Bank. We have Ruth Freeman, Dr. Ruth Freeman, who is Director of Science for Society at Science Foundation Ireland. We have, not on camera today, but joining us by telephone due to some broadband issues, Professor Cian Mahuna, who is Head of Micro and Nano Systems at the Tyndall National Institute in Cork. And finally, Ryan Shanks, who is Managing Director at the DOC, which is the Centre's Innovation Hub here in Dublin. So thank you everybody for joining us. We've got about 50 minutes set aside for this discussion, and we will allow about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions from attendees. To ask a question, I think you can see a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. So just type your question in there, and we'll try to get around them at the end. Obviously, this is a really interesting time to discuss this particular topic. On the one hand, COVID represents a threat to the development of smart cities and regions for economic reasons. So we're seeing smart city projects getting stalled or cancelled around the world. For example, there was the big waterfront smart city project in Toronto was suddenly cancelled in May due to a lack of budget caused by COVID. And on the other hand, as Alice described there, COVID is really proving the benefits of smart cities and regions, because cities that have this digital platform in place have been, you know, better able to collect public health data and analyze it and react much more quickly to slow the spread of COVID. And actually, Alice mentioned Singapore there, which is #1 in the global smart city index. Singapore, people might have seen, actually distributed wearable contact tracing devices to all of its citizens. And we will also have seen the kind of scary looking four-legged dog robots that Singapore city authorities sent into parks and gardens around the city to observe people and to warn them to maintain social distancing. As we all know, you know, Singapore has really been an exemplar globally in how cities have fought against COVID, a lot of which has been down to the digital building of the city. So really, I think what we've seen is an incredible acceleration of digital transformation in our cities and regions in the last 6 months. So we have a huge amount to discuss today. So let's jump right into talking to our panel. Robert, I'll start with you if that's okay. I'm keen to build on the view from Asia that Alice shared with us. The Asian Development Bank itself has been a major promoter of the development of smart cities through its Future Cities program, which is a program that's been rolled out in places like Tbilisi, Mandalay, Ulaanbaatar, and beyond. So Alice mentioned that cities are bouncing back quicker in Asia, but what are you seeing in Asian cities and regions now? And from your perspective, is COVID going to accelerate or slow down digital transformation and smart cities in the region generally?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Niall, and also just thank you very much, as always, to Asia Matters. We always, love taking part in your events. Highest standards of discussion in Europe on Asia. So, we're very, very happy to be here. Of course, the subject of the panel notwithstanding, would have been lovely to do it actually in Cork physically, and I had a few months ago, I think it was, I was in Cork before the lockdown, monsoon rain. So, yeah, I hope we can do that some other time. And
monsoon rain is here as well.
but I think the subject, as you say, ADB has a lot of skin in the game when it comes to cities development in Asia, because as Asia progressed over the decades, so the cities grew and grew and grew. And I think anybody who's been to your average Asian city will, there's a lot to be impressed about. There's a lot to be appalled about in many cases. And I think that was it was already very high on the agenda of policymakers, pretty much across Asia. That you have to, how do you get out of this quandary where you've got growth, but a lot of problems in those cities? And I asked our digital team to give us a few statistics, but I was on the line today to one of our senior assistants in Manila, everybody working from home, and just to ask, what's changed in Manila in the last 6 months? I haven't been to Asia in 6 months, which is unusual, and it was very interesting because it squared a lot with what Alice was saying. So what my colleague was saying was, first of all, in Manila, bikes. Everybody wants a bike or an e-bike. The prices have shot up. How do you keep people safe? Anybody who's been to Manila will know just how scary it can be to ride a bike. Also, food delivery has changed so much. Everybody's takeout, restaurants. The comment was, Filipinos are very sociable people. They like to meet and interact and sing, and you can't do that any longer. So what's the future of that? But I thought one point was extremely important, that my colleague there had actually left Manila, was going to the province. And the comment was, the quality of life is so much better in the province. And, people are in Manila because of the jobs. You go there, but otherwise it's cheaper, more green. Again, a lot of the points that Alice raised. And so for ADB, we're taking more and more complex approach, where it's not just about the city. You've got to also ask about, how do you deal with rural development at the same time, because the two are so closely integrated. And I think this is where actually Ireland has a lot of knowledge to share as well, particularly in this field. In China, for example, we've been working for 30 years, over 30 years, promoting quite innovative projects in China. One of the programs we've agreed upon is a rural vitalization program, because I think policymakers across Asia, I think, have realized that you can't go on forever, massively crammed, packed cities, which great for some, but the thing that COVID has exposed, again, to touch on a point that Alice made, if you're poor, the advice is wash hands. What if you don't have running water? What if there's no sanitation? I looked really interesting statistic I looked at. In developing Asia, there's 39 square meters average green space per person, as opposed to 255 square meters in Latin America, 74 square meters in Africa. Asia tends to be the top of the pops when it comes to growth statistics, but that's not a great statistic. No wonder my colleague wants to stay in the province and work from home. You can breathe the air. So that's that agenda was there anyway. And with various programs, we've been working on that for some time. But COVID, I think will just accelerate that. Now, again, a point which was made before. Countries which went through SARS-1, and I lived through the terrifying episode of SARS-1, which never seemed to end when we were in the middle of it, adapted quickly. So you see, for example, the numbers in East Asia and Southeast Asia. Look at Vietnam, for example, incredible performance in terms of low numbers of deaths and cases and control. Thailand, I speak to my colleagues in Bangkok, they're pretty much back to normal. So when you go through a trauma like this, there is a learning experience in very practical terms. So what role does digital technology have? Well, I think an ever increasing one for sure. Maybe if I look at what ADB is doing, we have, this is becoming more and more part of parcel of our everyday work. Now, our own estimate is that Asia needs $1.7 trillion worth of infrastructure every year. So that includes climate adjusted costs as well. But what we see is that within those investment needs, you can get a lot more bang for your buck if you include the technological side of that. And that's also very much what our developing member countries in Asia are telling us as well. When I worked on China, for our East Asia department, I headed an innovation group. Everything we heard from our counterparts in Beijing was innovation, innovation, knowledge. Bring us something we don't know ourselves. Otherwise, what's the point in having ADB there? So if I look at what we're actually doing, we have, I think so far we've had 1 in 10 projects that ADB does supports digital technology. So it's only 10%, but that number is going to rise very fast. The areas to get involved in, these, I think we pride ourselves in being quite practical. So things like cities, whether it's in an upper middle income country like China or Thailand, water is a common issue. So control systems for water distribution, digital asset management, real-time traffic optimization. I think very few people do that better than Singapore. IT systems for scheduling and tickets, e-government. I think anybody who's lived in a developing country in Asia will know how much time you can spend just getting your driving license or permits. That's a lot of time away from things. So these are the areas where we see ADB getting more involved. If I look at where we're doing those digital technology projects, the most common is China, by far. Then India, then Mongolia, which I would take a little bit of credit for as country director, because I think that's a country which recognized that with a nomadic population, huge sparse distances, what a great way to reach people instead of making them come in 100 miles or kilometers to do a simple transaction. ADB side, we work with governments and we fund projects, but I think an extremely important function that we have is the policy advice. Most, I think, if not all governments, rely on ADB for advice as to how things can be structured. And what's changed in my 2 decades in ADB? We've gone from being a sector bank to one more programmatic. You used to have a transport project, an urban project, maybe an education project. Now we have broader, more complex programs rolled into one. That's what China uses us for, rural vitalization program, Greater Yangtze Economic Belt, for example. We also work with the private sector. So we're funding more and more individual investors who want to go in and do things like telecoms in Myanmar or branchless banking in different countries. So it's something we're getting much more involved in, even though at the moment it's only 10%. Now, one aspect I'd really like to touch upon is governance. Ultimately, it's the quality of governance which makes a city or country tick. So we see great potential for things like public finance tax management, cadastral and land management, e-procurement, and then, of course, cybersecurity. I think especially, actually, when I was in Cork, we were talking with Cork Institute of Technology. What exactly can we do to help developing countries protect themselves? This was just after that big cyber attack on Georgia. So these are all, as a bank, we're looking for projects to fund and technical assistance activities to advise countries, businesses, how do you tackle all these big problems? And there's a lot of major entry points. So now, a city has to be about an economy as well. So one very interesting initiative we've got is called ADB Ventures. It's about creating tech ecosystems where you bring together, this is something which high-income countries do better than developing countries, even middle-income ones, where you coordinate, you bring together investors and policies and universities and incubators, service providers in one go. So more and more, that's our focus as well. How do you get businesses going with startups? Great potential for Asia in this one. And we have a special program coming through on that. Where will ADB go from here? Well, each country is different, has a different approach. So all our respective country teams, and we work in 40 developing member countries across Asia, are going to be creating roadmaps, digital technology roadmaps for the different countries we work in. And I think that will lead to a much higher rate of digital technology projects that you'll see. That number for 10%, it'll rise. I don't have a number yet as to where it will be. That also offers great who will actually do those projects? It's not going to be me sitting and talking with, I don't know, somebody in Colombo, for example. It's going to be a contractor. It's going to be an expert institution from an ADB member country who is either selling a technology, providing a service. But I think from an ADB standpoint, I think we do see a lot of opportunities, including for Irish entities to actually work in these different fields. And I think one thing our digital team, they classified, forgive me, I'll just take one more minute.
Sure.
These are the type of projects we'll be working on: broadband communication, smartphones, digital identification, digital payments, cloud computing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, drones, cybersecurity, geospatial information systems, Earth observation, genetics. So what I expect is more projects along these lines. The demand is certainly there. There will be a lot of opportunities through there. When it comes to cities, I think it's already there. COVID has accelerated it. It's made the need more urgent, but I think it will also bring the need for rural development and rural urban integration even stronger, because you need the two two other different sides of the same coin. So I think we'll approach that in that fashion. Maybe I'll stop there, but it's a growing field. COVID has accelerated it for sure. But it's part of an ongoing trend in any case. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Robert. That's a really interesting perspective. I mean, obviously we talk and think a lot about smart cities, but the idea of smart, rural areas or digitalization of rural areas, again, speaks to the opportunity that exists in a positive way around the whole COVID pandemic. So it's great to hear that, and I know there are innovators and entrepreneurs tuning in today. So that's a really interesting takeaway. Cian, I hope you can hear us still. Are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Great. I wanted to turn to you next, Cian, because I think it's a good time to get the technologist's perspective on smart cities and smart regions. So in your work at the Tyndall Institute, you have a focus on smart sensors and systems. So I wanted to ask you, as the concept of a smart city matured, how do innovators or city authorities or regional authorities themselves need to think about smart cities or understand smart cities in order to really maximize their potential?
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to talk today. I guess, one of the things that is predicted over the next 5 to 10 years is this concept of having a 1 trillion sensor economy. So therefore, having intelligent sensors throughout our environment, enabling and supporting the individual and the community and the economy from the point of view of managing energy resources, managing natural resources, water quality, even managing fitness and health of the individual with wearable type technologies. So if you think about that then, and you think about the city, you can imagine the use of sensors on smartphones and various other say video cameras and so on throughout the city. And I think that is very interesting. Even in the COVID situation, we have over 1 million citizens who are actually using the COVID tracking app to try and help the country to come back to some level of normality. And I suppose the way I think of the city, this future smart city, right? What we're looking at is this idea of live, work, and play in the city. So you have this concept of walk, bike, run. And, if I look at, say, Cork City today and look at Patrick Street, maybe 20% of the shops in Patrick Street are empty. And much of the shopping has gone to the peripheral shopping malls. But yet there's a whole load of these buildings, their upstairs are empty, they could be converted into apartments and so on. And we're actually seeing companies like Facebook and Apple who are utilizing the city to have their people live in the city, and therefore reduce their need for cars, buses, etc. Right, and bring the city to life. So if I think then about the businesses and the authorities, innovators, they need to enable the citizen to live within the city centre, and they need to leverage off the technology around these sensors to enhance the quality of life of the people.
Great. So one of the pieces that Alice spoke about there was the technological challenges, for example, rollout of 5G, and you mentioned a 1 trillion sensor economy. So, 1 trillion sensors don't come without some serious infrastructural or broadband or even power needs. So, if there was an innovator or an entrepreneur in the audience, like, what are the smart technologies where this great need exists? What are the white spaces that are out there when we consider this really rapid digitalization of both cities and rural regions as well?
So I actually think it's quite interesting. If I talk about those 1 trillion sensors, my first idea was that you'd have deploy and forget, which is a completely environmentally unfriendly concept.
Right.
So then I moved to the idea of deploy and retrieve. So maybe I have 1 billion drones retrieving 1,000 sensors each and then redeploying them with new batteries or whatever. And that's not economically viable. And then I go as far as to think about, what about deploy and dissolve? So now I actually am building or considering to build biodegradable sensor technologies that can be almost programmed to dissolve into the natural environment at the end of their lives, and yet they need to operate for long periods of time. So that's one area where I think there's a big opportunity. The other area, I guess, and it feeds into the whole perhaps remote working concept as well, is the area of augmented reality and virtual reality, which then feeds into smart manufacturing and manufacturing becoming much more customized, where you're looking at the idea of Industry 4.0, where you are perhaps relying on the customization of the manufacturing processes. And then you're looking at, the need for expertise around robotics, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, and so on, what would be called collaborative robotics, where the human needs to interact with the robot without being put in an unsafe environment. And you get to the modular manufacturing concept as well. So, if you think of virtual reality, augmented reality, Facebook are in Cork City. Tyndall works quite closely with them in terms of developing next generation technologies in that whole virtual reality, augmented reality space.
Great. Interesting to hear you speak there about the biodegradable sensor, biodegradable technology, and it speaks to this, I suppose, twin challenge we face at the moment. COVID has not made our huge existential environmental challenges go away. So just briefly, Cian, if you could, do you have any perspective on how digital technology and innovation can help us to achieve those twin goals of recovery from COVID, but also a more sustainable development and more sustainable cities?
Yeah, so I suppose it's interesting to see, when we think of disruptive events like COVID, they actually create innovation opportunities. And I think we're beginning to see that. One thing I would say is, in Ireland especially, but it must be across the world, this idea of true broadband and enabling the citizen to work wherever they need to, that is essential. And it is not actually in place at this point. The other issue that is really important is this idea of, not treating environmental issues all separately. what you can think about is the energy, water, food nexus. They're all interlinked, and they need to be thought about in that way. And the final point I would make is what COVID has shown is citizens want to be engaged and build their country and make their country healthy. And I think there needs to be far more leverage off that citizen engagement.
Great. Thank you, Cian. And I think that's a theme we're going to speak a bit more about, Ruth, the idea of citizen engagement and the role of smart cities and regions. David, can I turn to you next, please? Alice spoke about the great strides that cities like Shanghai and Beijing have made using digital technology to respond to public health challenges, and we all are fascinated to hear those stories. So, as Deputy CEO of Huawei here in Ireland, you're very close to the technology that's powering these smart cities, as well as the smart cities themselves. Actually, I think Huawei is based, its headquarters in Shenzhen, which was, 40 years ago a small fishing village, and now is the #1 smart city in China. So, can I ask you, in a city like Shenzhen, how is technology allowing the city to stay productive and competitive while also a safe and livable place to be?
Firstly, Niall, thank you for the invitation. It's actually Huawei's first year with Asia Matters, so we're very happy to be part of the family, if you like. Yeah, you equated there to Shenzhen, where HQ is based, having a history of a small fishing village. Actually, if you don't already know, the Shenzhen was modeled on Shannon. Back in the 90s, a delegation from the Chinese government sent by the Premier to look at certain models, economic models around the world. This is post-1950s, obviously, where they were looking at particularly the economic models. And Shannon was one of the cities or regions that they visited. And subsequently, they were very impressed with that model, and they brought it back, and that's when really Shenzhen was born. So really, we have a very close, not only is it Huawei's HQ, but we have a very close historic tie to Ireland, which is great. I think to answer your question, when we look at the smart city, I mean, pre-COVID, Huawei has invested nearly $100 million on a smart city center, and that's based around our campus area of Guangdong. But also Tencent is also a key player there as well. So that was a substantial investment for us. But again, as Cian was equated there about sensors, etc., etc. When you really see the impact of life there, and I'm with Huawei now a decade, or just over 10 years, and I typically will travel to Shenzhen a couple of times a year, and the pace of the growth there is absolutely phenomenal. And when you look at really in terms of the digital economy in China, it's predicted that 48% of GDP will be contributed to digital economy by 2035. It's at 23% now. But again, going back to your question, Shenzhen has been a rapidly developing city. It's our HQ, so we're very proud to be associated with that. But where we saw it years ago, we concentrated on the smaller aspects of the let's say the value in terms of technology, and that's around e-health, e-commerce, utilities. You look at now, since the last couple of years in Shenzhen, it's a purely cashless society. So e-commerce has really accelerated there. In terms of from the citizens, and particularly for Huawei personnel who are based there, I was looking at some of the statistics before I came on. So, for example, over the last 2 years, a couple of really notable statistics. Crime is down 30%. Airport queuing in Shenzhen Airport, which is a relatively new airport, so it's AI is central to the kind of the operations there. Queuing times are down 18%. Parking is also an issue at the airport, so that's also in the AI. That's efficiencies in there nearly 70%. And then just from when we talk about traffic, so a typical 1 hour drive from our employees into our campus with the traffic management, etc., was reduced by 20 minutes. So all of these have a very visible impact, I think, because when we talk about smart cities, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, etc., I think we're a long way away from that. So it's again getting back to Keen's example there of the, I mean, there's literally tens of millions of sensors deployed in Shenzhen now, monitoring all that, like water quality, air quality, pedestrianization, all that type of thing. So I think it's we've seen the impact of smart city and the value to both the citizens and employees of Shenzhen.
Great. Obviously, the scale and the budgets involved between a city like Shenzhen and an Irish city or an Irish region are very different. But what are the learnings, do you think, for Ireland and Europe as to how Chinese cities or a city like Shenzhen have accelerated and managed their own smart city development?
I think again, Keane touched on it there previously, but I would say it's collaboration. I think we're a little bit segregated here with councils, with government. So that's I think that was one of the first examples that I saw. A lot less bureaucracy, and everyone, because you could see the benefit immediately. Of course, when we talk about Cork or Dublin, they're older cities, so the infrastructure is older, so it's that little bit more difficult. We're only embracing now 5G technology, which underpins all of that technology and broadband. So I think we're a little bit behind, certainly on the broadband, with the broadband rollout. Unfortunately, giving broadband to everyone, which is really when you're when you look at SMEs in rural locations, it's nearly impossible to work from home. But more notably, 5G underpins all that technology. 5G has started, Air has started deployment now for the past year. So that's our advanced stage now. So I think we will be seeing the benefits of that technology now, which will underpin all of this creative thinking and technology around smart cities, I would say, over the next 12 months.
Great. You mentioned collaboration there, David, and I know that Huawei collaborates with a lot of Irish universities, including UCC and some SFI centres as well. But for Irish companies, are there collaboration opportunities with a company like Huawei, either here in Ireland or in China, around this whole theme of smart cities and smart regions?
Yeah, very much so, Neil. I would say both. Certainly, if you look at here in Ireland, firstly, we have a large R&D base here. Over half of our revenue, which is over $120 billion last year, is regenerated back into R&D. So we've 3 research centres here, Cork, Athlone, and Dublin. And certainly we focus very much on software. So it's from a local aspect, yes, and we are in collaboration with some Irish companies. We're always looking for new ones. I think Robert there used the word innovative and innovation, and certainly we certainly have an abundance of talent when we talk about innovation in the software sector here in Ireland. So we very much leverage that, and that's why we have our basis here for R&D and software. And in China, for sure, I think there are many companies now in China, but the opportunity is vast.
Great, thanks, David. Ruth, can I turn to you next, please? It seems that from what we've heard today, smart cities are the one area, a key area of science and technology where the public can really benefit from innovation in terms of quality of life. And there was some great insight there from Alex along those lines. For example, the ability to book space in a park, which none of us thought we'd ever have to do, but it's great that we can using smart technology. So as Director of Science for Society at SFI, it'd be great to get your perspective on the role of smart cities for society. It seems clear, as people have said, that a smart city needs smart citizens who are actively engaged and taking advantage of these new technologies. So how, in your opinion, can citizens play a meaningful role in the development of smart cities?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps more than smart citizens, it's about engaged citizens and informed citizens and citizens who feel that they can be part of those conversations, because I think that's often the first barrier for people who are not connected to the technology world is how do I even get into that conversation? I wouldn't even know where to start. And it's interesting, at Science Foundation Ireland, as well as funding research and being the main sort of public funder of competitive research here in Ireland, and we work with a lot of companies like Huawei on new technology, we also have a very specific remit around public engagement with science and technology, which I'm very, very happy to oversee at the foundation. And it's interesting, every year we run Science Week each year. It happens in November, and it's a week of events all over the country, and it always has a theme. And last year we had as our theme climate action, as the kind of, as you mentioned, the overriding sort of existential crisis that's facing the world, but probably that most scientists would have said before COVID was the key issue that we had to solve. And we were sitting thinking, after we did last year, what would we talk about this year in November? And back at the end of 2019, we decided that the theme should be choosing your future. And because maybe we were more prescient than we thought, because suddenly this pandemic hit the world and in many ways changed things and paused things and gave an opportunity for a lot of the conversations that are happening now. So it is about how do we then go out to the citizen, the general public, and ask them what do they want out of the future. And it's interesting, my background is genetics. And if you look at the history of genetics as a technology, I mean, it very much failed to build trust early on. It failed to go and ask citizens what they wanted. I mean, I was really interested that Robert mentioned genetics as one of the suite of technologies that they're looking at, because in many ways, the promise of genetics that has been coming for 20 years was hugely slowed down by the fact that the public and citizenry did not want to engage with it. And what we're seeing now is it's only coming through in very, very high cost medicines for diseases that have been found to be intractable for other routes. And I think that's where we need to be careful, because with all of this technology, I mean, trust is going to be a big issue. And what we have seen is that if you're presenting people with something that's almost a fait accompli, I mean, even actually the internet is a good example. If we look at us trying to regulate the internet kind of after the genie's out of the bottle, as it were. So I think when it comes to smart cities, we have an opportunity to be more inclusive, and we have an opportunity not to slip up in the way that some of those other technologies have slipped up. So, I mean, how do we do that? Well, it's not going to be easy. I would say that's the first thing. I mean, it'll take real effort by the private sector, by governments and researchers to actually go out and proactively have those conversations with community groups, with citizens. So it's not just going to happen. I think that's the first thing. We have to make it happen. And we have a whole program of work at Science Foundation Ireland, which is everything from working with broadcasters and media to try and spark conversations with people, to actually, we'll be working on a really interesting project. It was another big day for us today. We announced the big tranche of projects to look at the COVID issues and projects to try and help deal with that. But one of the really exciting projects there is with Professor Jane Souter from Dublin City University. And an area that I think Ireland and Jane have led in globally is in this idea of deliberative process. So rather than kind of taking chunks out of each other online when we disagree, the idea that we put together something like a citizens' assembly and we get groups of people who agree to come in and be part of a process in a much more thoughtful and, I suppose, informed way, and that we can get good decision making and good policy making out of that, where we have buy-in all the way along. And I think we need to talk to people about the upsides and the downsides of some of these technologies. And we have to reassure people that we're also going to work with regulators and lawmakers so people are protected and they can get the benefits of these technologies without being so concerned about the downsides. So, it's going to be work. I think that, it's not going to be easy, and we all have to take that on. But I would say it's absolutely critical that we do, because I suppose where I come up from in this role is that people have a right to be involved in these discussions. And, there is an element that we can't have a democratic discussion about these cities of the future if we leave most people out of those discussions. And what we will end up instead is with resistance and unrest, as opposed to the kind of, I suppose, harmony that we would like to paint, and that really the amazing benefits that these technologies can bring. And in fact, when we look at climate, I mean, really technology is going to have to play a fundamental role in solving that for us. So we need to let those technologies progress, which are going to do things like manage our energy usage, our emissions, which will require gathering data, which will require putting sensors into the environment. So we need people to buy into those technologies and allow us to roll them out.
So you've talked about the engagement piece there and the importance of buy-in and engagement of citizens in technology. Is there scope as beyond that for innovation? So it would seem that citizen-led innovation is potentially a really rich source of new technologies to create economic benefits and quality of life benefits. But does that happen, and how could we motivate or organize citizens to take part in that kind of citizen-led innovation?
Well, I think we can involve them in the innovation process. So again, a lot of countries and bodies like the one that I work for, and even the EU, are looking now at this idea of missions. So alongside, I suppose, strategic research themes, we're also looking at the mission and the end goal. And I think if we can all agree on what that end goal is, then how do you put together teams that have diversity on the teams, that are not just all scientists or all engineers, but actually bring together broader sectors and have everyone as an equal member of that team, and respect the different kinds of knowledge and, I suppose, the history and the experience, the lived experience that different people can bring to innovation. And certainly in our challenge funding programs at the foundation, we insist that there's kind of a non-academic, at least one non-academic, non-scientist on the teams that we put together to solve particular problems. Because I think we could all think of examples of work that's happening in a university, which, when you take it outside of the university, doesn't work for some reason, and actually probably someone could have spotted that quite early on in the process if they had access to the process. So I mean, there's really good work done by a group called Campus Engage, which kind of supports academics to go out and work with broader stakeholder groups from the very inception of their programs. So I think, if you're a traditional academic, you're sort of trained to keep everything to yourself. You work in your team, and then once you've published the paper or filed for the IP, you can do the big reveal of the technology. And I think when we're talking about the scale of challenge that we all have now, we need to think more collaboratively, and we need to think differently. And so I think that's about increasing diversity in teams in all sorts of different ways.
So again, it's great to get that kind of theme of potential or opportunity around the whole area. Do you think, looking at Ireland's smart city evolution or successes, do you think there's untapped opportunity in that area in Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, SFI is working with a variety of stakeholders on smart city projects, and I think often what we find, I think it was David, you mentioned it about, the joined up overall national strategy. And what we would find is, you get great individuals in city and county councils who will buy into projects. And I think it's how do we bring them all together? And I think this idea of a national strategy around smart cities, around rolling out some of these technologies, I think because we're small, we might be able to make progress there in terms of linking up, these smaller pilot projects into bigger projects. I think that's an opportunity. But I also think if we can get ahead on the buy-in, the citizen engagement, and the regulation, that will allow us to go faster in a way that maybe hasn't always been possible with some of these kind of technology projects.
Yes. Great, thank you, Ruth. Finally, Ryan, and thank you for your patience. It seems that smart cities are really at the epicenter of a lot of seismic changes going on at the moment: technological, societal, environmental, public health, etc. And these forces really have the potential to accelerate the digital transformation coming out of cities. So, given your position at the DOC, which is Accenture's flagship innovation center in Europe, you're really at the coalface of all things transformation, innovation. And Alice spoke about, the need to bring people together to innovate, which obviously has become more challenging. We associate innovation with face-to-face brainstorming sessions and sticky notes and whiteboards and beanbags and all that great stuff that you have down in Grand Canal. But is innovation happening now, and how, in a practical sense, is it happening?
It's a good question, and one that we get a lot. And I can say at the moment, so for those that may not know, the DOC is an organization of about 300 or so designers, social scientists, technologists, artificial intelligence folks, and we partner with companies around the world on innovation. And we would fly around a lot, and a lot of people would fly to us, and we worked all over the world, and of course that has stopped. And to be honest, we've never been busier. We're recruiting at the moment. And I think what's interesting in that is, on one hand, what the pandemic has brought, I think, is the crisis has brought a focus like never before. I mean, businesses are focusing in now to move, right? Actually, one of the things that slows innovation the most is complacency with relatively easy growth. So this has really brought in focus. It's also increased the risk appetite at a lot of companies. Again, when you got a lot to lose, you can pull back on risk. But when it's for some of our industries existential questions, they're willing to try anything. And so, in that sense, we've got a much bigger drive. That bigger drive then means innovation is not about real estate. It's not about facilities. It's about engaging with a diverse amount of people to come up with interesting new ideas that can be delivered and add value. And so we're continue to work with companies around the world, leveraging technologies like the one we're in right now, to create, we no longer do a 1 week sprint. You can imagine we're not on the phone for 8 hours a day with one group of people all around the world, and that sort of feeling. We chop it up in different ways. There's new, what we call phygital interactions, where we send equipment to our clients' homes and our employees' homes, where they actually even decorate their office. So all of our places look and feel the same, to kind of create this immersive feeling. So we attempt to do that. And yeah, there's a lot of progress going, fed by this real upsurge in interest in innovation right now. So people will suffer through, to some extent, what we're dealing with now. We heard earlier about virtual reality. That would be things there's a company called Vertwave, for example, that we've experimented with in Barcelona, and others. You could imagine this is a real nice opportunity for virtual reality to go beyond training and some of the other use cases, to be like, how could this actually work? So I think that's exciting. I will say, with all of that, though, we are missing face-to-face human action. I think for change to happen in our organization and for our clients, trust is an enormous currency if you want to get things to move. And that is harder to do with people that maybe have not met each other ever face-to-face around the world, and to try to get that going. So I think, I don't want to downplay the power of interpersonal face-to-face relationships. Even the energy and the buzz you get out of working directly with our clients have with their own consumers and so forth can be more of a challenge. So I would add one thing too. Alice mentioned this: the dichotomy is not home and work. Because we will be in this state for a while, what I'm noticing is people are increasingly meeting up out in the parks. And actually, innovation does not happen in offices. I mean, it can, even if they're beautiful and they have bean bags. But at the end of the day, get out with customers, get out in the city, get out of the office. And I think there is an unintended side effect of all of this. If people are realizing that work doesn't have to happen in your home or you go to an office, there's lots of places to meet up with different people. And I think to an earlier point, this is an opportunity for rural areas as well. In Ireland, for instance, the Ludgate initiative down in West Cork, there's others where why don't we meet up in other places around, to get closer to where consumers are and closer to where the problems are. So I would add up face-to-face is important, but that doesn't have to be in an office. I don't agree that there's the death of an office, though. There will be an office, but it's not the only other option.
Yeah, no, I think we all have a new understanding of what offices are good for and what maybe they're so we're all starting to hear from all of us. You've quite a unique vantage point. You're part of a global innovation organization. So from your perspective, what companies or even what kinds of companies are leading the way in adapting and transforming to respond to the challenges that are out there?
Perhaps on the challenges, I would say, and then I'll talk about companies after that, a couple of examples. The one thing that's happening, and a lot of the companies I work with would be global, large, let's say multinational. And I think one thing they're dealing with right now is what we'd call a global local dexterity. We are at many, many different speeds in many governmental regimes, in many situations for the virus all over the world in every geography. Organizations that are able to all of a sudden now create a bespoke response across the world to different pieces. So Accenture, there's a stat that I think is interesting, that it's from June. We had a snapshot. In June, we had 513,000 employees globally, and 95% of them worked remotely. And it started in China, where we have employees in China. We have large amounts of employees in India and the Philippines, across Asia, and it goes all the way. And you can imagine we followed through Italy, through the rest of Europe, and then over to North America. We have been learning amongst ourselves between the companies of how to navigate this pandemic and learn from each other as we keep trying to keep our own people safe and a real focus on safety. And there's a number of companies that have been doing that. But I think that's one characteristic, one interesting thing of the people that have been thriving, is this focus on the people and the employees and their safety, and then navigating all of the nuances of the geographies around the world. I think secondly is uncertainty. So I think particularly after the summer, many businesses are just understanding this is going to be a way of life, all the way from the CEO down to the lowest levels of organizations are coming to terms with the fact that some version of this is what we'll be living with for a period of time. So scenario planning, that is a key thing that I think is really in scenario planning for resilience. There's a real interesting upsurge in that. And we're working with a company, Blue Diamond Growers. They're a food company in the US. This is a public case, so I thought I could use them as an example. But redefining supply chains. I mean, if you're running a food company right now, there are so many, are the restaurants open or are they closed? Or what are people going to make a run for in the shopping markets or not? Successful companies right now are really doing some really interesting proactive scenario planning to be able to figure out how do they best respond. We've seen the retailers, because they've had to, and I'm sure everyone has stories around the world, picking up things from the curbside. The ones that already had a significant online presence are thrilled that they did. The ones that didn't, I think, have been really struggling to try to create a whole new experience and so forth from an online perspective. And as like mentioned earlier, I think, another one that I have found interesting is, with the reduced travel, the oil price dropping, having that be the real thing that pushes the likes of BP to come out and say that they set an ambition to be net zero by 2020. Or sorry, not 2020, but 2050. And that raises a whole amount of innovation and interesting things. So there's some really bold statements coming out of this whole piece, that the energy transition is now something people are going to take really seriously. And so I admire the big energy companies that are really starting to make much more bold commitments about the energy transition. And I think that's right off the back of what's happening right now too.
Great, thanks, Ryan. getting close to 3:20 now. Just a couple of questions for the panel that have come in while we spoke. And if you could give quite brief answers, we'd appreciate it. One for you, Robert. How can Irish companies work with ADB in digital transformation projects? Just brief. Robert, I think you might be on mute. Actually, we can't hear you. No, sorry, Robert.
No.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, our website, given that this is a digital platform, we actually have, you can look at we have a very comprehensive list of projects which are coming through on the website, where we actually are bidding for, we have invite bids for contracts for digital type of projects. Now, especially one thing I see very often is, particularly in Europe, is that very often the owners of the know-how or the technology that would be of interest in Asia, that particular entity probably doesn't know anything about ADB or might not have ventured out as far as wherever it might be, Indonesia or the Philippines or Tajikistan. So we actually have our office in Frankfurt. Please approach. Please contact us, and we can give some advice. We also have regular interaction with Asia Matters as well, and in cooperation with Enterprise Ireland, to actually sort of sit and talk through companies. Just how does it work? And generally, it's much simpler than one might expect. But basically, we're happy to talk. My one piece of advice is, look at the different countries. Every country, we've got a different program. There's something called the country operations business plan that gives a pipeline of projects for the next 3 years. And it's really quite informative and detailed. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Unfortunately, we're right up against it time-wise now. Apologies to people who've asked a question and we haven't been able to answer, but I think with the help of Sam and Martin, we might forward them on to people and aim to respond after the fact. So I just want to say thank you again to our whole panel, to Alice, to Ruth, Robert, Ryan, David, and Cian, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. I'm going to make way now for Mr. Du Zhang, who is the mayor of the Wuxi Municipal People's Government, who starts at 3:20. So thank you once again to everybody for a really interesting discussion, and hope you enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall.
Thank you.
Thank you, Niall.
Thank you, Niall, and all the panel, and to Alice for her great insight. We all look forward to a day when we have true broadband, 5G, we hope, and equally when we have the Internet of Everything as opposed to simply the Internet of Things. I now have the great pleasure of introducing a key address from Mr. Du Zhang, who is the mayor of Wuxi Municipal People's Government. Wuxi City in Shanghai is part of the twinning with Cork City Council and has a population of 6.5 million. It is the national IoT base and hosts 25% of China's microelectronics industry. Clearly great opportunities to partner with this high-tech hub. Over to the mayor.
尊敬的何向东大使，尊敬的李秀文大使，尊敬的马蕊莱恩汉福利军长，尊敬的乔伊卡瓦纳市长，各位企业家朋友、女士们、先生们、朋友们，作为科克市的友好城市代表，无锡能够受邀参加第6届中国爱尔兰商业峰会，我们感到十分的高兴和荣幸。首先，我谨代表659万无锡市民和无锡市政府，并以我个人的名义， 对本次峰会的成功举办表示热烈祝贺，向爱尔兰各界朋友致以诚挚问候，向长期以来为中爱友好交流事业做出积极贡献的各界人士表示崇高的敬意。无锡地处中国经济最具活力的长江三角洲几何中心，拥有3100多年文字的记载史和2200多年建成史，自然风光秀美，经济繁荣发达，素有太湖明珠、江南圣地的美誉。改革开放以来，无锡经济社会发展取得了历史性成就，成为中国具有较强影响力的经济强势和区域性中心城市。2019年，全市地区生产总值超过1534亿欧元，约相当于爱尔兰全国的44%，人均 GDP 超过2.3万欧元，在中国大陆城市中居第2位，仅次于深圳。在对外开放方面，无锡也一直勇立潮头，走在前列。目前与全球220多个国家和地区建立了经贸往来关系。去年外贸进出口总额825亿欧元，世界财富500强企业中，有103家在无锡投资兴办了201家外资企业，国际友好城市数量达到49个，朋友圈遍布5大洲的28个国家。相知无远近，万里尚未临，这是中国一句很有名的唐诗。诺贝尔文学奖获得者、爱尔兰著名诗人叶芝也有句名言：人心只能赢得，不能靠人馈赠。自2004年与爱尔兰科克市开展友好交往以来，无锡始终秉持以诚相待之心，努力推动双方各领域合作交流取得丰硕成果。在经贸合作方面，我们坚持共抓机遇，互利互赢。我市生物医药龙头企业药明康德投资了3.25亿欧元在爱尔兰敦多克市建立生物制药基地。今年3月份，已顺利完成主体的建筑封顶。在人文交流方面，我们坚持密切交往，增进友谊。科克市先后4次派出政府代表团来无锡参加友好交流活动。我市先后派出6名人员赴科克市政厅实习培训。我们十分感谢科克市对该项目给予的专项经费支持。10多年来，科克市经济发展规划局前局长派特莱德威奇先生为促进两地友好交往做出了杰出贡献，我们对此表示由衷的敬佩。今年专门授予了派特莱德维奇先生无锡市人民友好使者称号。在疫情应对方面，我们坚持同舟共济、共克时艰。疫情无国界，世界各国是休戚与共的命运共同体。在新冠肺炎疫情全球蔓延之际，无锡与科克市第一时间互致慰问信，并向科克市捐赠了3万个医用口罩。无锡疫情防控和恢复经济发展等方面等经验也获得了爱尔兰观察者报等主流媒体的广泛报道。无锡是中国唯一的国家传感网创新示范区，打造世界互联网之都是我们一直为之努力的目标。目前，无锡集聚物联网企业超过2000家，初步形成了较为完整的产业链和较为完备的技术创新生态系统。物联网产业的规模保持全国领先。虽然无锡土地的面积仅占全中国的5%，全球的1/10000，在世界地图上只是一个微乎其微的小点，但却是中国物联世界的重要通道，世界感知中国的重要窗口。近10年来，一大批创新技术在这里先导策源，无锡累计承担省级以上物联网研发项目2000多个，牵头或参与制定物联网国际标准12项，国家标准50项，物联网专利申请量近1万件，其中发明专利申请量2500多件， 一大批优质资源在这里先行集聚。在中国率先完成载带物联网全域覆盖和 IPv6规模的布市，成为第一个物联网连接超1000万规模的地级市，建成58个公共服务平台，物联网人才总量超过18万人。一大批示范应用在这里先试探索，有无锡企业承接的物联网工程遍及全球68个国家和700多座城市，累计开展应用示范项目300多个，实施了全球首个城市级车联网应用项目，成为中国首个车联网的先导区。当前，物联网的发展未知远远大于已知，物联世界的聪明远超我们的想象。爱尔兰素有欧洲硅谷的称号，信息通信技术产业闻名于世，是欧洲物联网产业发展的重镇。正因为相信，所以才会看见，无锡十分期待与爱尔兰在物联网产业领域开展深度合作，以双方的优势叠加，实现能力倍增，携手在技术研发、产业培育、标准制定、应用推广、模式创新等方面做出努力，共同探索物联网产业发展这片广阔的蓝海。同时，我们也十分期待与科克市进一步拓宽各领域的务实合作，提升互利合作的水平，共同谱写两市合作交流的新的篇章，努力打造中爱两国地方合作的典范。最后，再次感谢此次峰会主办方的邀请，衷心祝愿无锡与爱尔兰之间的合作交流结出累累硕果，祝中国爱尔兰商业峰会取得圆满成功，也希望下次我们能够在无锡相聚。谢谢大家。